Hello everyone, and welcome to a extended version of 3 Laps 3 Topics, where we're going to review the 2014 24 Hours of Le Mans. So I wasn't actually able to watch as much of Le Mans this year because I was having a busy weekend with having double booked myself on a couple of other things, but I'd just like to kick off with thanks to Radio Le Mans for their great coverage again across the weekend, which allowed me to keep up to date, know what was going on throughout the race, and yeah, just great work again from John Hindhoff and Yves Hewitt and the full team. So I'm going to kick off with looking at GTE Am, which I was so pleased to see was won by the Dane train, the Aston Martin Racing GTE V8 Vantage, driven by David Heinemeier Hansen, Christian Poulsen and Nicky Team. So if you don't know the backstory to this team, it's the young driver program for Aston Martin, but it's the 95 car that lost compatriot Alan Simonson last year in the first hour of the race. And as I said in my preview video, they've driven fantastically for the last 12 months in such difficult circumstances to pick themselves up and carry on. They've had some great results in the WEC in the last year, several class podiums. So to round out the year with a class victory at Le Mans, it's a great tribute to Alan and the efforts of the three drivers and the whole team, all the engineers behind that 95 car. For me, it was one of the highlights of the race. They were pretty dominant in their drive to the win. They're probably the most sure of any of the class winners to get the win. Although there was a slight worry for myself I think it was in the last hour where they went into the pits having a 4-lap lead. But I think it was just to tidy up the car and make sure it was going to get to the end. So a great drive from that team. I'll also mention the other two cars that finished on the podium. So the Proton Competition Porsche 911 RSR, the number 88, driven by Christian Ried, Klaus Bachler and Khaled Al-Kubasi. Once again showing the strength of that Porsche 911 to get a podium. And third on the GTE Am podium was the AF Corsa 61, driven by Luis Perez-Companc, Marco Ciocci and Mirko Venturi in their Ferrari 458. Great points for their title aspirations in the WEC this year. Got a bit of a break now until the next WEC race, but I think they'll be quite happy to look back at their first part of this season and know that they've done well. So sticking with the GTs, as we do this first lap around the Circuit de la Sarthe, the winner, kind of unsurprisingly, but it wasn't plain sailing for them, the winner of the GTE Pro class was the 51 AF Corsa, driven by Gianmaria Bruni, Giancarlo Fisichella and Tony Vielander. But once again we saw a great battle throughout the whole race in this class, with Bruni and co coming out on top in the end, as I cautiously predicted in my preview, because they have been the strongest team in the GTE Pro class over the last year. I was pleasantly surprised to see the Aston Martins doing well. For a while, for the second year in a row, for a while it looked like the car of Darren Turner, Stefan Bucco and Bruno Senna was going to have a real chance of taking the win, but unfortunately they had some problems later in the race and in the end finished 35th. So also big kudos to the Corvette team, who they did take second. So they took second in GTE Pro with the 73, driven by Jan Magnussen, that's right, Kevin's dad, Antonio Garcia and Jordan Taylor, and only one lap behind the AF Corsa as well. So that really showed the tightness of that pack there. So third on the GTE podium was the Porsche Team Manthey car, the Works Porsche, driven by Marco Holzer, Fred McAvicky and Richard Leitz. once again, this car could have potentially won, but had its problems along the way, and in the end completed 337 laps to take third. So once again, we saw, a great GTE battle. The strength of that class going forward is absolutely not in doubt. So a great treat served up by them once again. So moving on to LMP2, which as ever was just so close throughout the whole race. So even going into the last 2 hours, we still didn't know who was going to win. And I was delighted to see the Jota Sport team, the British Jota Sport team, with 3 British drivers, Simon Dolan, Harry Ticknell and Oliver Turvey. They took the win in LMP2, having completed 356 laps, and they were pushed quite hard though by the TDS Racing team, with Paul Thiriet, Ludovic Bardi and Tristan Gomondi in one of the new Ligier's the Ligier JSP2s. What a great car that is. That it wouldn't have been a surprise if, that being a new car, it had broken down halfway through the race, but one of them finished second. The Brundle Mardenborough Schalitsky one, engineered by Oak Racing, that finished 5th in the class. So a great show for the new Ligier P2 car, very much showing up the efforts of the, get the abbreviated commas out here, Team Lotus entry from the year before, and once again showing that LMP2 is a properly strong class going forward. There's some great cars that are going to be great looking cars that are going to be on the grid for next year, and I really think that LMP2 is better than it's ever been at the moment. But back to the race itself. So we'll come more onto this when we look at LMP1 in the next lap. But of course, Jota Sport, that car was meant to have Marc Genet in it, but Marc Genet stepped up to the number 1 Audi car for reasons which we'll get onto later. So Oliver Turvey stepping up and driving so well, along with Simon Dolan and Harry Ticknell, to take the win. It really was kind of a fairy tale win in the way. They weren't the favourites going into the event, so to take a win under such circumstances, if you remember as well, if you watched the LMS at all, Simon Dolan had a very, very big crash at Silverstone a few months ago, so that team haven't had the easiest ride going into Le Mans. So to come out of it with their first class victory, full marks to them and the efforts that they had. I'll also go back to the Oak Racing team, the 35 driven by Alex Brundle and Jan Mardenborough and Mark Schalitsky. Particularly Brundle and Mardenborough drove fantastically. For a while that was looking good for a podium, but once again they had their problems here and there. But what a fantastic drive from that team. And I know there's a lot of discussions at the moment with who Nissan will take on for their LMP1 programme next year. I reckon Brundle and Mardenborough are a real good shout for getting a drive there, so we'll have to watch this space. Anyway, we're on to the last lap. Let's look at LMP1. So we'll start towards the back of LMP1 with the effort of Rebellion Racing. I said in my preview that if one of the Rebellions got to the end of the race, that for me would be one of the top achievements at Le Mans this year, and I'm very glad to say one of them did get to the end of the race. The number 12 car, driven by Nicolas Prost, Nick Heidfeld and Matthias Besch, finished 4th, because of course in LMP1 we had probably the highest amount of drama in terms of retirements that we've seen in many years. Unsurprisingly, really, with considering that all of the cars in LMP1 were brand new cars in terms of it's the first time round Le Mans. So a great effort by the Rebellion boys to finish on 360 laps, 4th place overall, and I was so glad to see that car get to the end of the race. There's a few question marks with balance of performance and can they be allowed to compete with the works teams going forward. But yeah, their mission was simply to get to the end of the race, and that's what they did. Moving on to the battle for the overall win itself. Once again, a pleasant surprise for me, and I think it was a lesser surprise because I did mention that I thought Porsche could do similar to what Toyota did in their return year, all three works cars, or all three works teams, I should say, at some time or other were looking good for potentially getting the win. So Porsche in the end had problems, pretty terminal problems on both cars, unsurprisingly. But that's not to say that their effort was a tremendous effort for their first year back at Le Mans, running for the overall win. Particularly strong for the number 20 car with Mark Webber. That was in the lead, I think, at about 15 hours, 16 hours, kind of like early morning for us in UK time. So that was great to see. The favourites going into the race were obviously Toyota, and for good parts of the race and up to the point where I put my head down to have a little sleep, they were looking good for the win. Not with the car I expect, not with the Davidson car, but the other car, the number 7 car. But unfortunately, I think it was Kaz Nakajima who was in the car at the time, who'd driven brilliantly in qualifying as well. Absolutely stepped his game up, kind of under the radar really. So that car suffered, I think it was an electrical problem while stuck at Arnage corner. We were unfortunately unable to get back, which was a shame, but they'll be back next year. Bigger, better, stronger, I think possibly with a third car as well, so that'll be interesting to see. But lastly, let's talk Audi. So Audi once again semi-predicted this, semi-thought this could be a possibility, knowing how Audi have done over the years. They didn't have the fastest car, but it was still a pretty quick car nonetheless, but it was reliable. It was more reliable than the others. And yeah, the number 2 car, driven by Benoit Trellier, Marcel Fassler and Andre Lotterer, they took the win. Once again, by the simple premise of endurance racing, if you can keep your car out of the pits, out on track the longest, you will win the race. The number 1 though had a very, especially considering the circumstances, a very strong defence of their title. So if you hadn't heard, before qualifying, Loic Duval had an enormous crash through the Porsche curves, which totally wrote off the car, meant that the car totally had to be rebuilt. Loic Duval himself had to be replaced by Marc Genet in the team, but still a great effort by Tom Christensen, Marc Genet and Lucas Di Cresi to come home second. Rounding off the podium as well, third was the Davidson Bohemian Lapierre car, which similarly had a real tough race. They had a crash early on, which also took out the number 3 Audi. So for them to finish on the podium was a real great effort. So all in all, another great Le Mans. Bring on 2015. I hope you've enjoyed the video. I've been Andrew the Blade. Please like, subscribe, and I'll see you later.